morning once again to most of you. Let's go right into the homework worksheet that you have for today. Remember, we've been talking the past few classes now about 4 types of harmonic sequences. The descending fifth, the descending fifth variant, the ascending fifth harmonic sequence, and the ascending fifth variant. Okay? And we've been associating a unique baseline with each of those harmonic sequences so that we can recognize or identify those sequences in real actual music. We know that the descending fifth sequence, for instance, the baseline goes down a fifth, up a fourth, down a fifth, up a fourth. The descending fifth variant goes down a third, up a second, down a third, up a second. The ascending fifth sequence, the bass goes up a fifth, down a fourth, up a fifth, down a fourth. And the ascending fifth variant sequence, the bass goes down a second, up a third, down a second, up a third. Okay? I hope you're checking me on that because I just... All right, so the homework that you had for today, you had a little bit of part writing to do in the top section, section A. In section B, it wasn't 4 voices, but I wanted you to follow the pattern or the sequence that each voice was doing. I wanted you to continue that in section B. And then finally in section C, I think I just wanted you to analyze the passage with Roman numerals and then non-chord tones and then identify the sequence type. Now, let me open the floor for, see if there are any questions about any of these sections on this handout. Yes?
This is just like an overall question.
Uh-huh.
For me, in part of the syllable, I kept like having problems like with the pattern of the octave soprano, because it kept like omitting like the so of each chord. Is that like a common theme, or is that like just for this example?
Oh, you mean like it omitted one of the tones of the chord?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay in this case because we don't have 4 voices. We only have 3. And I know triads can be fully realized with 3 voices, but generally when you have 3 voices and not 4, because you're trying to follow pattern or part writing rules, oftentimes one of the tones of a triad needs to be omitted. That's that's standard, that's kind of common even with 3 voices. So yeah, don't worry about it if, for instance, like the first chord in the box, it doesn't have a fifth, does it? But it was given to you that way. So I would assume then that the first chord outside of the box would not have a fifth. And then the first chord in the last measure, yeah, if I'm looking at that right, that would not have a fifth either. So yeah, if you don't have a fifth, that's good because that means you're continuing the sequence in each of the voices. You're following the pattern as you should.
Thank you.
Yep. By the way, one thing I forgot to remind you about is, remember last class we looked at several harmonic sequences that were in minor keys? What did I say about the particular use of scale degree 7 when you write a harmonic sequence in a minor key? Remember there was a general rule of thumb? You're supposed to use this certain version of scale degree 7 until, and when you use another version of scale degree 7, you remember that?
Like T or five?
Yeah, like T or T. So, yeah, remember I said that in a minor key harmonic sequence, the composer uses Te all throughout the sequence until the end of the sequence or until the cadential dominant, the dominant at a cadence is reached. And at that point, the composer uses T. You see how in section A, your figure bass has you raise T in that 5 chord at the very end? Did you, in section B, did you get the second to the last chord, did you get a 5? Or did you not have to analyze it? No, I had to analyze the chord. Yeah, I had to analyze the chords. Yeah, and so did you remember to raise T with a sharp, G sharp, towards the end of section B? Yeah, that's all I'm just saying, talking about there. Okay, can I, maybe let me quick play these? Yeah, so you can hear how they go, or how they're supposed to go. If you follow the pattern in section A, you should have this. Well, that's really out of tune. I don't like that high note there. Yes.
So in the bass on the second one, did you like that G to F, G to G, or is it okay if you just put the roots down?
Okay, like how do you,
So like they did like the root and then third, and then they did double D, like,
oh.
did you want us to write that for you?
Yeah, that's kind of what I did. That's exactly right. In the first section, section A, did you find the pattern? In other words, I don't know if I asked you to, but did you find the bass notes that reveal the sequence type? Okay. I tend to always circle those bass notes. Remember, they're not always going to be consecutive, one right after the other, that reveal the sequence pattern. But I tend to circle the ones that do show the pattern. It's the bass notes at the points where the chords change, where the harmonies change. So I have my bass notes that reveal the sequence circled in section A, B, and C. So I can see at a glance very quickly, oh, that's why that sequence is ascending fifth, or that's why that sequence is descending fifth variant, that kind of thing. Okay. Are there any other questions about this assignment? All right, this is what I'd like to do. In lieu of collecting the assignment, I'd like to give you a half-sheet copy quiz. In fact, there's just a few true-false questions that aren't on your sheet. You can just answer quickly, but then the rest is just copy straight from your homework. All right, let's do that. Let's take a few minutes to fill this out. You want to do it? You don't know. Oh, by the way, I was going to remind you in the part rating example in the middle of this quiz, I need all the voices, so make sure you include your inner voices too, alto and tenor. not just the soprano and bass note, but all four voices. You mean with the 16th note? No, that's fine. Yep. Since this is a copy quiz, it looks like the majority of you are done. Can we try to finish up in about a minute, please? Very well, I'll come around and collect these. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Oh, technically, but I don't think I'll take off the other one. This is one we got right. Okay, but yeah, technically. All right, I do want to take about 5 minutes or so just to show the answers now for the homework assignment. So keep that out for just a few more, sorry. And I'll put them on the screen here. And I already played these examples before I attempted to play them. So the first example is an example of a descending fifth variant. Descending fifth variant sequence. Why is it a descending fifth variant? Because at the places where the chords change, we have bass goes, you see my circle notes? Try to ignore the ones in parentheses. Circle notes go down a third, up a second, down a third, up a second, down a third, up a second. And this is my, you can compare your part writing with mine. And did I ask you to break Roman numerals to this one? Yeah. Again, the Roman numerals, generally they come right off of the front side of your handout. But remember that in a descending fifth variant sequence, every other chord is in first inversion. First inversion. Questions? Going on to the next section. This is an example of a descending fifth sequence, not a variant. The notes that I circled, A was down a fifth to D, up a fourth to G, down a fifth to C, up a fourth to F, down a fifth to B, up a fourth to E, down a fifth, down a fifth to A. So really it includes the entire bass line. This is in A minor, and you can see that all the chords in a descending fifth sequence should be and are in root position. Is it okay to write a diminished triad in root position in a sequence? Yes, it is. In a harmonic sequence, you can have diminished triads in root position. That's right. And I think I already talked about how, notice this is in A minor, notice how that there are G naturals that are used throughout this sequence. That is te, until we get to the dominant towards the cadence there where you have to raise it to G sharp. But otherwise, before that G sharp, all the G's should be natural. And then finally, the last example was an illustration of an ascending fifth sequence. Here are the bass notes that I circled where the harmonies change, up a fifth. Now you might say, but look, Dr. Hawkinson, it's up a fifth. Well, isn't up a fifth the same as down a fourth? You'll get the same pitch, just an octave removed. Okay. So finally, when you get here, you get up a fifth, down a fourth, up a fifth, etc., etc. But up a fifth is the same as down a fourth. You'll get the same note, the same bass note, just an octave away. And notice that the harmonies in this ascending fifth sequence are all in root position. They're all in root position. Is it okay for a dominant chord to go to a predominant chord in a harmonic sequence? Yes, it is. It's allowed. They allow a lot of funky things in harmonic sequences. So I guess from now on, like if you ever make an error in terms of writing in a progression or doubling or something, just say, oh, but I thought I was in a harmonic sequence. And then, oh, and then there's a few non-chord tones here, by the way, I shouldn't forget those. There were 3/4/3 suspensions I got and one retardation. Okay, if you're cool with that, then let's move on to the new harmonic sequences for today. Today I'd like to introduce you to 4 more harmonic sequences. And then that's the total we're going to have by the test. We're just going to have a total of 8. The 4 that we've talked about already and the 4 more today. We remember, of course, that in a harmonic sequence, all of the voices must be sequential. That means all the voices need to be doing their own repeated pattern at different pitch levels. Okay? But with any repetitive pattern where all the voices participate, you could probably assume and guess that parallel fifths and octaves can become a problem. And you know, even though we're allowed to have some exceptions in our part writing within harmonic sequences, we are still not allowed or permitted to write parallel octaves, or parallel fifths, or parallel unisons. Okay? But I said that with any repetitive pattern, parallel fifths and octaves can become a problem. So for instance, take a look at this sequence where every single, and I know there's only 3 voices, not 4, but each of the 3 voices, their sequential pattern is just to keep going up by step. That's what the soprano's doing, that's what the alto's doing, and that's what the bass is doing. But you notice when you do that, take a look at all these parallel fifths that can crop up. I should be using the red marker for that, but you see them all? Between the bass and the soprano. So you've got to be careful. You've got to be careful when you write a harmonic sequence that you don't introduce a set of parallel fifths or octaves in there between any 2 chords, because if you do, chances are that pattern is going to be repeated, and then you're going to duplicate or repeat your parallels over and over and over again, which is never a good thing. I should have probably put them in another color. All right. Anyways, so we have these parallel fifths and octaves in here. But the most common way that composers avoided these fifths or octaves was to insert a first inversion chord between each root position chord, keeping the same bass note as the root position chord. So in other words, I have parallel fifths throughout here, the bass and the soprano. But look what happens if I just do one thing. If I just change the rhythm of the soprano, and I do this, but I keep the same bass note. You see how that's going to break up what was a bunch of parallel fifths? And now C to A makes a sixth. And then D to A makes a fifth, and I don't have the parallel fifths that were there once before. Okay. By the way, what is this harmony here in the key of C major? A, C, E with C on the bottom. Is that not like a chord like that? I would say yes. But is it? You're going to find out that this is all going to be this great harmonic sequence. Is it okay to have strange inversions in harmonic sequences? Yeah. Let me do the same thing. If the soprano's pattern now is da da, then I'm going to do the same thing in this measure, da da, and I'm going to do the same thing in this measure, da da, and the same thing in this measure, da da. And so now I get 2 chords per bar, as I did in this measure. And so this is a 2 chord, but B, D, and F, there's another chord there, and C, E, G, looks like I'm doing this right. And then here we get D, F, and A. And this could continue to infinity if we just wanted to keep continuing the sequence. But I guess what I'm trying to point out is that because I had the soprano move from a fifth above the bass to a note a sixth above the bass, what was a bunch of parallel perfect fifths, those are all gone now. And this whole process here creates a succession of fifths and sixths between intervals between the bass and one of the upper voices. And it breaks up the parallel fifths, and the whole process is known as something called 5/6 technique. 5/6 technique. It's just, I don't think that it's super clever, but it's just something that composers thought of and realized and came up with and used in order to break up just a bunch of consecutive parallel fifths. They just inserted another note, a sixth above the same bass each time, and that got in between the parallel fifths and intervened, and we don't have it anymore. And so that process is called 5/6 technique. Okay? Instead of having a note above the bass, a fifth all the time, a perfect fifth, move it to a sixth above the bass, and then it will go back to a fifth, and then a sixth, and so on and so forth. So you can see these intervals between the soprano and the bass are all intervals of fifths and sixths. Now, the result when we use 5/6 technique is a harmonic sequence with a bass line that rises by step, and a succession of harmonies that alternate between root position and first inversion. You can see that, right? This type of harmonic sequence is called, and I'll give you a handout on this in a second. This is a harmonic sequence called an ascending 5/6 sequence. It's called ascending because the chords eventually rise gradually. It's called a 5/6 sequence because we have intervals of fifths and sixths above the bass in each pattern. So it's called an ascending 5/6 sequence. Let me give you the handout for these. This should be the first one on this handout, the top left, when you get it. Okay, can I have a volunteer to read the top paragraph again out loud? You don't have to hear me. Any takers? Yes, please.
A harmonic sequence is a passage based on a repeating harmonic pattern or a repeated interval pattern. In the 5/6 sequences, the harmonic pattern is based on intervals between the bass and another voice. Like the 5th sequences, the first 2 chords establish the pattern in all voices, and the pattern is then repeated until the sequence ends. It is particularly important to pay attention to the pattern developed in the bass line.
Okay, thank you. So the second sentence that Dusty read in that paragraph is really important. These are all on this page here. All of these are called 5/6 sequences. And in 5/6 sequences, the harmonic pattern is based on intervals between the bass and another voice. That's what the second sentence says. The bass and another voice. So do you see in this handout, do you see the interval between the bass and the soprano here again? C up to G is a 5th, C up to A is a 6th, and then in the next measure, D up to A is a 5th, and D up to B is a 6th, etc., etc. And do you see how the first 2 chords, because the 3 voices are undergoing their own melodic sequence, they're creating these chords, and the first 2 chords form a pattern, which is then repeated at different pitch levels each time. What is the difference between this grand staff in the first example and this grand staff? Well, it says over in the left here, it says, same example except for the rhythm in the bass voice. Or I guess the lower voices, you can include the alto voice. But it's the same thing. Okay? Now, so this is an example of using the 5/6 technique to your advantage. Now, what does this sequence sound like? This is one of my favorites, and when we hear it used in real music, you'll probably see why. But it sounds kind of like this. You just keep going. It's kind of a nice sounding harmonic sequence. All right, so that's the ascending 5/6 sequence. And I hope you can see the 5/6 motion, these intervals between the bass and, in this example, the soprano, just one of the upper voices. Now, this is the only sequence, harmonic sequence, by the way, where the same bass note is used for both chords of the model. You see in the solid rectangle there, just the solid rectangle, the first 2 chords, you see how the same bass note is used for both of them? It's the only harmonic sequence where we have the same bass note. But then, after the first 2 chords use the same bass note, then the bass does what? What is its ultimate pattern right there? Up, by, step. So, for an ascending 5/6 sequence, I'm going to want you to eventually memorize that the bass moves up, by, step. And associate that particular bass motion with that particular sequence. Now, can we have somebody read this second paragraph down here on the variation, the interval movement? Any takers? Okay, please.
Sequences that move by 5/6 motion can be varied by changing chords that are normally inverted into root position chords. As in the basic sequences, the pattern established by the first 2 chords is repeated in all voices until the point at which the sequence ends. Below the asterisks indicate chords whose inversions have changed.
Okay, so now this is going to be a little bit, well, it's just a little different than the first handout I gave you on 5th sequences. Do you see how in the normal standard ascending 5/6, every other chord, Roman numeral, is in first inversion? But then in the variant of the ascending 5/6, now every chord is in root position. So it's just the opposite of the 5th sequences, if you can keep that straight in your mind. In the 5th sequences, like the descending 5th, every chord is in root position, and the variant, every other chord is in first inversion. Well, now with the 5/6 sequences, The basic pattern, every other chord is in first inversion, and the variant, every chord is in root position. It's just the reverse. Okay? What happens when we change all the chords of the ascending 5-6 sequence? What happens when we make them all in root position? Well, we get the ascending 5-6 variant. What is the particular baseline pattern I want you to memorize for the ascending 5-6 variant? It says right there, the bass goes down a third, up a fourth, down a third, up a fourth. Okay. By the way, in these variants, you will not see any intervallic fifth to sixth motion between any of the voices. You won't see it because all the chords are in root position now. But it's just a spin-off of the 5-6 sequence that's up above it. It's just a spin-off. We're just changing the inversion of the chords. That's all it is. Okay? So let's hear what the ascending 5-6 variant sequence sounds like. Okay, so we have something like this. Okay, can we go on to the top right? This, the descending 5-6 sequence and its variant are also some of my favorites. Let's look at the descending 5-6 sequence proper first. Here you can see intervallic motion between the bass and an upper voice that produces fifths and sixths. So, let me use this. I don't know if you can envision this or picture this, but can you imagine if this, let's say the 5-6 chord, let's say the 5-6 chord was completely gone. Let's say it wasn't there. Do you see how we would have parallel fifths and octaves if I went from the bass C and the soprano E and then straight to, not the soprano E, excuse me, the bass C and the alto C, and pretend the 5-6 chord wasn't there, and then I got to an A in the bass and an A in the next chord? That would be parallel octaves. And can you see how if the 5-6 chord wasn't there, the bass C and the tenor's G would go straight to the bass's A and the tenor's E here, and that would be parallel fifths. So you see the fact that we have 5-6 technique going on in here, that breaks up parallel fifths and octaves that would otherwise occur. I guess that's kind of the main point. Do you see now the intervals of the fifth and the sixth between the bass and the tenor voice in this example? C to G is a fifth, B to G is a sixth. The same thing, bass and tenor, A to E is a fifth, G to E is a sixth, and so on and so forth. It just continues. It goes on and on and on until the sequence ends. Okay? Now, this sequence is known as the descending 5-6 sequence. Notice what the baseline pattern is for the descending 5-6. The bass goes down by step. That's the pattern you're going to have to remember or memorize for that one. Incidentally, I just want to remind you too that every voice, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, is undergoing its own melodic sequence. Every voice has a pattern that is repeating. Each individual voice is doing something over and over and over again at a different pitch level. And that's what's creating these two chord units, which create the overall harmonic sequence. Let's take a listen to the descending 5-6 sequence quickly, excuse me, at the piano. This does sound like something you've heard before in a Disney movie, maybe? Does that sound like, it sounds similar to some Disney this song. I'm trying to think of which. Maybe it's not Disney. Maybe it's like, oh, you guys wouldn't even know that. Flight. Do you know what, is that a mouse or a rabbit?
Yeah, it's like the American car or something.
Yeah. That's what it kind of sounds like to me. Somewhere out there. Oh, I'll have to Google it. Okay. Finally, like the ascending 5/6 sequence, the descending 5/6 sequence can be varied by placing every chord in root position. And then this sequence is called the descending 5/6 variant, with every chord in root position. Oops, there we go. That's where I want to go. Descending 5/6 variant sequence. The 5/6 intervallic motion between the bass and upper voice is not visible in this, and that's because every chord was purposely placed in root position for the variant here. Okay, but what is the bass pattern for the descending 5/6 variant? The bass goes down a fourth, up a second. That's the main thing we need to understand there. And I hope you can see that pattern there. By the way, what on earth does this mean over here to the right of the variant? This sequence, although it probably wasn't called the descending 5/6 variant back in Papa Bell's time, it's the exact sequence that he uses for his piece. How about that? Talk about using a harmonic sequence for one of the most famous pieces of all time. Unheard of. No way. Kind of thing. Okay. Now, I think what we're going to do is just to finish off here. Oh, by the way, I should pause. Do you guys have any questions? I know this is, again, a lot of information thrown at you, but I'm hoping that the 4 sequences listed clearly on this handout will help you get used to them and as accustomed and familiar with them as you did with the other handout that had the 5th sequences on it. So there's a difference between sequences by 5th and 5/6 sequences. This is what I'm trying to say. All right, let's take a look at one example maybe on the back side of this handout. So turn it over. You can take a look at maybe the top one. If it wasn't so prominent, I would normally not be able to find the composer of this passage because he's hiding. Okay, let's find the bass notes that create the pattern that reveal the harmonic sequence type here. And I don't think we have to look too hard. In fact, it even tells you, don't I tell you what the sequence type is for this first type example? Which kind is it? Ascending 5/6. What is the bass pattern for an ascending 5/6 harmonic sequence? Bass goes up by step, right? Yeah. So, now I can't find my pencil, I'll find it eventually, but what I want you to do then is I want you to circle the first note of every measure. You see how the bass goes up by step in this example. Circle the first quarter note in every measure. That will reveal the fact that it is an ascending 5/6 harmonic sequence. It's just that Haydn dresses up these sequences. Most composers will fill out or dress up these sequences so that they're not just block chords, but they'll maybe add a few non-chord tones. They'll change and monkey with the rhythm to make it sound like real music. But really, you know, when you boil it down, bare bones, these passages are just harmonic sequences. That's all they are. Now, I won't be able to play the top line with this because I don't have, 12 hands. But maybe I can at least play the piano accompaniment down there so you can hear how it goes. I'm sorry, I didn't use the pedal here so you can hear that. tenor, you can kind of almost hear and guesstimate what the next chord is going to be. Especially the ascending 5/6, the fact that it rises, it almost feels like the mood or the atmosphere is lifting. I just find that they're very interesting. We don't need to go through all the examples on the back today. We can do some of those next class. All right, now, the last thing I want to do is, I believe I got everything else. I want to give you the handout for Friday. I want to give you the handout for Friday, and then I'll give you one hint in the top section to help you get started on this. So this is the assignment for Friday. Boy, did I give you guys enough paper? This is the class you have the most paper in? Yeah, I believe it. If there's two, just give me back to that. Okay, so section A on this homework assignment says, in 4 voices, part write the following sequence. Continue the rhythm in the bass voice with chords on the first and last 8th note of each beat in the upper voices. Analyze with Roman numerals that identify the type of sequence. The notes in parentheses are non-harmonic tones. All right, so just to get you started here, just look at the bass line here. Which of the 5/6 harmonic sequences we just learned from your other handout, which one is that example of? Say it again. Descending 5/6. That's right, it's a descending 5/6 sequence. So that's what you put in the blank off to the right. Now, I just want you to be careful here. It says continue the rhythm in the bass voice with chords on the first and last 8th note of each beat in the upper voices. So wherever the bass note or the bass line has a note, that's where you're going to fill in the alto and the tenor voices. You don't have to fill in, well, you can see that the middle notes and the soprano on each beat are just 9-chord tones anyways. And you're going to follow the figured bass in order to get your harmonies. Now, I am okay, when I did this top example part writing, I'm okay if you have to have some of the inner voices leap kind of far. I'm okay with that. In fact, large leaps are a lot more tolerated and more allowed within the context of harmonic sequences than in regular part writing. So feel free, I mean, I don't want you leaping an octave in the inner voices, but if you need to leap a 4th or a 5th in the inner voices between chords, I think that's okay. What's the overarching goal we need to remember when we part write though? That every voice has to be what? Okay, well, okay, yeah, we'd like them to be as smooth as we can. But even more important than that, in a harmonic sequence, every voice has to be sequential. In other words, you can't have the tenor, let's say the tenor, for the first chord stayed on F sharp, F sharp, F sharp. Then kind of the next one, can you have it leap all over the place? No. Whatever the pattern is between the first 2 chords, that's the pattern you got to continue for the next pairs of chords. It's just that it'll be at a different pitch level. Does that make sense? Do you see how the soprano is sequential? Ya-da-da, and then it starts on a different pitch level. Ya-da-da, then a different pitch level. Ya-da-da. And then the sequence finally breaks so that we can have a common cadence. I don't know if this makes a whole lot of sense to you, but just try to remember that whatever you part write for the first 2 chords, make sure you don't have any part writing errors, and then just duplicate that part writing for the next pairs of chords at a different pitch level. Okay? So whatever the tenor does between the first 2 chords, and whatever the alto does, it'll have to do those same things again between the next pair of chords, just at a different pitch level. I think I've reached the point of diminishing returns here, so we're just about out of time. Let's go ahead and quit for today, and hopefully some more of this will we'll go over ascending or 5/6 sequences again on Friday. We have another class to do with these yet, so.
Yeah, that's so
You could, but in the sense that they're actually creating another chord, because we can analyze and figure out another chord with these pictures here. And there's the other chord, based on this motion here, that's getting in the way of the straight parallel steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, just kind of, but they are chord tones. They create their own second respective chord. So, in that case, I would not call it appreciation. That would probably be wise. I don't know that I've ever had students get confused about that in the past, maybe because the examples are just clear enough. But we'll take a look at some other examples now and try and well, there's actually a one. There's both for example, right here. It comes from a computer, that's not a computer. It's just a very good path. You have to listen to it. Yeah, he uses it.
You remember a while ago, we were doing something like, yeah, modulation, and like he gave us like, here's what modulate from
Oh, yeah, right.
one key to a minor key.
Yeah.
Well, like he gave us some time on it, and I decided to put it into a little, just, I just wanted more, so I never.
Can you play? Does that play?
You think it's like made it? Yep.
Yeah. I can hear the chromatic hit enter there, the signal hit. It is practical stuff. You just need to apply it to
Yeah,
real life.
it was fun, because like, the instruments I chose, some of them were in like, the key it was in, so like I had to pick stuff in theory too. with-
Yeah, you have to sing tunes.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Oh, yeah.
I continue to write for that right now.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
so.
so sorry, Weber.
I'm trying to like.
I probably deserve to get some.
Yeah, I don't get a lot of chance to write except maybe this December I will, since we have a longer break. And maybe you can find some time to really flesh that out and put that together, whatever you're working on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think that'd be a good time for it. Yes, ma'am.
The only reason I
So it's just like between classes.
Yeah, I noticed that I graded them yesterday and I didn't have one in there.
Yeah, I recorded them on Thursdays and I went to take a shower and my computer must have died or something. But I did
Okay.
record it.
Well, if it's there now, I'll take a look at it.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. I thought I'd let you know.
You're okay.
Okay, let's go.
Hey, can you remind me to get Micah high shoes?
Why are we getting Micah high shoes?
Because I keep snapping his questions.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, that's
okay.
I'll mark it after class.
I'll just check again.
Thanks for.
That's great.
Yeah.
I might buy a few of the suits and spray them too.
Okay. They probably need it.
They didn't even shake their head.
And then